when you look after a human being from that perspective, then their performance is always going to prevail. Like if that is ignored and they are just expected to be sort of machines on the pitch and are not cared for, they may never reach their full potential. So I think that's why I am where I am and how we've been so successful in kind of football with making safeguarding everybody's business and why we are where we are today, really, with this department.
Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast, your go-to place for empowering behind-the-scenes stories of trailblazing women who work in the sports and event industry. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake, and I'm honored to bring you this free resource where you'll hear firsthand accounts of how these incredible women got their seat at the table. And I will personally share strategies to help develop your leadership skills in this industry. We've got a lot to explore together. I am so glad you're here. All right, Game of Her Own listeners, let's do this. All right, we have Eleanor Rowland, Director of Safeguarding and Inclusion for the Fulham Football Club. Welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast. I'm so happy you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here and hope I can, share some good stuff with you today.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it. I was like, wait, this is the first guest I've had that is from I want to say soccer, so I'm struggling right now, and I'm like, oh, don't say soccer. It's football, but football club. This is really exciting. Okay. Since you mentioned Chicago Fire before we hit record, I'm gonna embarrass myself and mention Ted Lasso because that's my only experience
We're
with
actually very
it.
close to where that was recorded, actually. So we're
Oh
like where
no.
we're based, like where I am right now is kind of literally a sort of 15-minute drive from Richmond where the whole Ted Lasso thing was recorded. So
All right.
very local.
Is it relatable? Did you guys find it like they painted a true picture, or are you like, it's not really like, I mean, I
Yeah, I
know Ted
love
Lasso's character is out of this world, so that's a whole different thing. But just in terms of like the
Yeah,
football.
I loved it. I thought it was so much fun. I mean, it's probably not that accurate in terms of the actual kind of runnings of a football club. There's obviously a lot of
Mhm.
drama added to it, but yeah, I think the whole kind of it was just a fun way of kind of describing soccer, football as we call it. And there was so much in Ted Lasso that I feel that we could be doing actually in football that we could take inspiration from. Like I think there's a scene where he gets the team to do the choreography of NSYNC's Bye 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 video or something. I was just like, being a
Yes.
huge NSYNC fan, I was like, yes, like let's get our players to do that to get them motivated, to get them motivated. I don't think it would actually go down that well, but stuff like that, I'm like, yeah, I wish we worked in a world where like the players would do something fun like that.
Well, thank you for indulging me on that for a minute. Okay, so we met because we were connected because of my partnership with Everything in Sport, the women's edition conferences. So you were just in Miami, and
Yep.
if correct me if I'm wrong, but you were a part of panel or panels, and were a featured speaker. So tell us about your experience, for people who don't know about Everything in Sport and what it's like, and what it's like to be a part of the conference.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, I spoke at the conference just before COVID in England, actually, and it was a women's edition back then. And it was kind of the first conference that had like a female kind of relevance to it. So it was kind of the start of the journey. But obviously, unfortunately, because of COVID, things kind of stopped. And then there was another conference last year which I couldn't make. And then I saw that they were doing one in Miami, and I was touching base with the team there, Leon, and I was like, what do you think about me speaking on the subject of safeguarding? And they were just really keen for it. So safeguarding is actually pretty huge in England, but I think it kind of dawned on me mainly when I was in the States last week, especially when I was on the panel, because I think the woman who sort of introduced me was kind of like, this is Eleanor Rowland, and she works in safeguard. And it was like, you could just tell that the term is not a familiar term in
Yeah.
America. And
Hmm.
I think for us, like in the UK, it is something that there's probably not many people these days that don't hear the word safeguarding. It's in schools, it's in colleges, it's in most work environments where we're talking about safeguarding and looking after children and young people. And so it feels quite strange going into a whole new country where that term is just, it doesn't mean to say that the sort of practice of that work isn't going on, but it's just the terminology is different. So I felt an obligation to kind of relate to the audience because it was mainly a US audience. And so trying
Hmm.
to kind of think about examples that would be relatable and think about where we have things in common. It really helps. Said to you just like you say before we hit record, I met with Clara a few days earlier at Miami Heat, and it really helps get a good understanding about the types of work that's going on in the workforce around people, culture, and diversity. And actually, whilst we have different names for things, I was absolutely amazed from my whole experience in America this last week about how much similarities we have, the amount of issues we have, whether it be around gender equality or racial abuse, homophobia, all of these different types of issues we were talking kind of really openly about, and where our organizations are supportive of this and kind of how we're trying to make a change in the world around anything to do with social justice matters. And yeah, we were kind of all sort of singing from the same hymn sheet in that respect, just different names for things. So so whilst I was there to kind of share my story, I feel like I actually selfishly kind of got more out of it myself, because having these conversations, and I was really lucky to be joined by Mega, who is chief counsel at the Jaguars, and which is, we are co-owned. Fulham is owned by the same owner as the Jags. And so speaking with Mega and kind of working for the same organizations basically is just, yeah, it's just such a privilege to be able to kind of share those experiences, and both feel that whilst there are still lots of issues, that we are both being supported by our organizations to kind of address those in the best way we can. So it was really interesting, and kind of, although I was very nervous, it's the first time I've spoken internationally. So, but it was a good experience. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
So two things. I was doing my research before, and I was trying to understand what safeguarding and inclusion, because Clara, and for those of you who don't know, Clara was a guest, gosh, a week ago or 2 weeks ago now. So I'll link to her episode in the show notes. You can listen to it. But she was talking about it too, oh, safeguarding. I didn't know what that meant. I learned so much about how they do things internationally. So for safeguarding and inclusion, is there something that is the equivalent in the States?
I think maybe your focus in the States is probably more around the emotional well-being, welfare type category. And I wonder if that is, I don't know if I really totally got to the bottom about kind of who takes responsibility in each of your organizations, your sports clubs, for that real kind of safety of children and young people. We unfortunately in the UK had a very serious kind of issue, particularly in football during the 80s, which led to a number of young footballers being abused. And that came out in 2016. They made disclosures around the abuse that they received. And I think that we all started to have a better understanding about how sports can have what we call positions of trust. So people that, and positions of power. So being a football coach, whilst in itself in the workplace is not a particularly powerful position, to a young person, that coach is everything. And so in the wrong hands, that coach could start to ask for things that's obviously not appropriate for illegitimate means. And so we know that happened years ago because people weren't watching, people turned a blind eye, people didn't want to talk about it. And so, not just in football that's happened, but it's happened in sort of girls and boys scouts institutions, it's happened in the church, it's happened in the film and media industry, a bit like the Me Too movement. People are now just starting to realize what was actually happening to them during that time. And so safeguarding, particularly in football, was really kind of, its game was raised in 2016 when we were like, we can't have any more young people who are kind of having the coaches abusing their position of power and kind of abusing them. So roles like mine were put in place. And at the time, I was actually only a part-time safeguarding manager. When I came into role, I was actually working for a child protection agency in the UK, sort of social services, if you like, and working on some really difficult cases, many of which were serious case reviews where children had been significantly harmed or had died as a result of their sort of family circumstances. And I did that for 4 years. And I think I just got to the point where I was like, I need a break from this.
Yeah, that's heavy.
And that was the child protection end of the safeguarding continuum. And then I saw a job offered in Fulham, and I was like, what would football be doing that required a safeguarding manager? Even though I was a football fan, I just didn't understand where they would sit on that continuum. Anyway, I obviously accepted the job, took the job, and it was a little bit out of the frying pan into the fire, because immediately this disclosure had happened from some ex-footballers and talking about really serious allegations of sexual abuse from the 80s. And so there was a huge government inquiry in the country around how we better protect young professional athletes. And it was very focused on football at the time. And I think it's because it's our sport, it's our home sport, and kind of, I think a lot of money in it. And so I think people were feeling like, where's the investment in these young people? And our football club's just machines churning out athletes at what cost to their well-being and their mental, emotional health. So I started part-time as a safeguarding manager, and within 3 months I was like, I can't do this in part-time hours. I need to do full-time. I became full-time, and then within a couple of years I was head of my department. And meanwhile the Premier League are kind of working alongside all clubs and realizing that actually this area of work is huge. All of the young people that we work with, the really amazing thing about football as a sport generally, especially in this country, is that it doesn't require any investment from families. So if you're a cricketer or some other sport, you have to buy equipment and you have to invest in that. Whereas with football, you can be anyone. So it's all walks of life who are involved in football and who can be good at football. So we can have people's children that turn up to here for training in kind of chauffeur driven cars, and then we can have 10-year-olds who've been sent on a train across London to get here because their parents have got other siblings, and they can't travel with them. And so the levels of risk are so varied, and it would be pretty naive to expect that any of those children who come to see us don't have stuff going on in their sort of wider lives, that they don't have stuff going on at home, that they may not be safe at home, they may not be safe at school, they could be being bullied. And so basically now me and my team are responsible for making sure that that sort of social psych side of an individual is being cared for, because we know that when you look after a human being from that perspective, then their performance is always going to prevail. Like if that is ignored and they are just expected to be sort of machines on the pitch and are not cared for, they may never reach their full potential. So I think that's why I am where I am and how we've been so successful in kind of football with making safeguarding everybody's business, and why we are where we are today really with this department. So I feel like I've forgotten the questions.
Well, yeah, I had like three questions at once,
Okay.
so you're fine. And I was like, "Ooh, you really painted the picture of the work you do, why you do
Yeah.
it, why it's impactful, and
Yeah.
it's necessary, and it's heavy." It sounds like to me like you're not putting, I guess you don't put yourself first in any role, but this is really like heavy stuff. So how do you manage your like mental health with something like this?
It is really heavy, and I guess it's probably not for everyone. Not only are you dealing with, sometimes quite really sort of nothing, you can't say anything else other than they're just sad stories of the circumstances that children are living in. Sometimes you're having to refer parents to authorities as well, because you just don't think they are equipped to safely parent a child, or they're putting that child's life at risk. And having those conversations with the parents is difficult because they will also become potentially aggressive and adversarial towards you. And so that is never a nice conversation when you're having to call a parent and say, I have a duty of care, I have to report this to social services. And that is probably
Yeah.
the most difficult part of the job. But as I always say to my team, that is a difficult conversation, but what is more difficult is if you don't report something terrible happens and you're stood in court and someone's saying to you, you knew this, why did you not share it? So just take that conversation on. I always ask for my team to do that in a way that is kind and non-judgmental. And, we know that people have stuff going on, and 99% of the time, it's very rare that parents intentionally want to harm their children. Sometimes they just don't have the means or the understanding or the resources to be able to do it. And so we have like a wealth of resources in team to kind of support parents, whether it be for transport, we provide food, all different sorts of kind of support we offer to families to kind of ensure that their child has the best possible opportunity. But back to your question around kind of the heaviness of that, like that is heavy. And I would say the main source of support I get from that is my team. I think as a team, we are so supportive of one another. It's okay not to be okay is kind of one of our mantras. There's quite often we shut the office door and we'll have tears or kind of moments of kind of anger or whatever. We just get that out to one another and feel upset about something and then let it go. We have fairly flexible working, so it's kind of our hours are very sporadic as it is. So we kind of if you have something to do in the morning or whatever at home, then if you're in a bit later, that's not really a problem. It's not like a 9 till 5 job, this. So I think most of us kind of enjoy that flexibility. And then on a more formal basis, we do actually all have clinical supervision, so, or what we call reflective supervision by a psychologist who supports us every sort of 4 to 6 weeks, where you sort of have an hour, 2 hours, where you're able to process some of the decisions you might have made in reference to child protection issues that month, anything that's really upset you. And I'm such a huge believer in taking that protected time to talk about your month. There has been so many times I've walked into the session with our club psychologist. He's a clinical psychologist, and I've walked in and I've got my morning coffee and I walk in and I'm all smiley and he's like, "Hey, how are you?" And I'm like, burst into tears. And it's like,
Yep.
oh, I thought I was okay. And I'm sort of laughing and I'm like, I thought I was okay. I'm really not okay. Like that, this is, I've had a really bad week actually. And so, yeah, so there's a few different ways of support, but I honestly think just being able to be open at the club and be able to express what we're dealing with, and to have a senior team board level at the club who support me in this role is incredibly important.
Hey, Game of Thrones listeners, Jahaan popping in here. Do you ever feel overlooked at work or perhaps unsure how to advocate for yourself? You are not alone. And it's exactly why I've created a free training called Empower Your Career, Mastering the Art of Self-Advocacy for Promotion and Raises. In this training, I will teach you tactics like how to have meaningful interactions with your leadership team, how to increase your confidence, and there's so much more. You'll walk away with the tools to confidently seize control of your career growth. So, what do you think? Are you ready to stop being overlooked and start being noticed? If you are, the link to sign up is in the show notes. Let's elevate your career together. All right, let's get back to the episode. What I think I'm missing one piece. So I understand like young professional, like football players and
Yep.
the safeguarding that, would need to occur, or I can imagine it, right? But my lack of experience in your world and international football, talk about where's that intersection of children and the football club? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, what am I missing that they're a
Yeah,
part
so
of?
I think what you're referring to, because I think we picked this up in America actually, because I was doing the same. I was going to the Jags and Miami Heat, like, where's your academies? They were like, what's an academy? So every single football club in this
Um,
country, I think most football clubs, well, actually, it's probably not every single one, but the majority of football clubs have academy systems, and they start from, we call them under nines. So under 9 year olds, so 8 year
mhm.
olds is the first year group where you can be registered to a football club. And we have sort of class sizes, if you like, probably between 12 and 20 children per age group: under nines, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, and 16s. And then when you get to your under 16th year, that is where you're offered the opportunity of a scholarship. So up until you're 16, you are in full-time education mainly. And there's some different education models, but if we just, for the ease of sort of, for simplicity, we just say that all of the children are in full-time education. So they go to school all day, and then they will come here on an evening 3 times a week, and they will train usually from 5:30 till 8:30, something along those lines. They'll train gym, recovery, strength and conditioning, and they'll have a program, and then they play games either on a Saturday or a Sunday. So that's their weekly routine. And then when they get to 16, then it becomes a scholarship. If they are offered a scholarship, then they are with us for a further 2 years, and they're on site full time, 8 o'clock till probably 3 o'clock. And we then provide their education, their further education. So you have to be in education until you're 18 in this country. So being with us on a scholarship is your education, and they do like what we would call an MVQ in sports science, and some people do A levels and go on to do degrees, etc., but we just support them depending on where they're at with their education. So yeah, so the children are with us for kind of quite a long period, some of which, we've got 20-year-olds here now who've been here since they were 9. So this is their home, and they've been coming their entire lives to Fulham. And footballers in this country get, in my view, quite a hard time. The media pick up on them being
Ooh,
kind of
yeah. Mhm.
individuals who earn excessive amounts of money and perhaps have a bad reputation for the way that they sometimes have been known to treat people, etc. But I think it's sad that they all get the same brush, because, from my experience of the boys that we have here, most of which are, you know, just really, really lovely, respectable young men and who have been through an education system that's well and above that of what the kind of state system offers. So we have an additional sort of, we do life planning with them. You know, we provide them with education on how to buy your first car, how to get a credit card if that's what they're getting, or how to manage their money. You know, they're going to be getting big salaries potentially. So, you know, we do financial management with them. We also prepare them for education in case they're injured and they can't continue as a footballer. So what's their contingency plan? So there is a lot of investment in these young people. I think the hardest part for any footballer, and the thing that the sports is dealing with at the moment, is that exit plan. So you get to 21 and you just don't hit the mark, and there's nowhere else for you to go, and you have to just go back to the real world
Oh,
and
that's hard.
find a job. And you've been coming here every night since you were 9 years old, and you're now in your 20s, and it's like telling that person that they need to now go and get an office job,
No.
become an estate agent, or, you know, the mental mindset is really tough. And I don't think any of us in any club underestimate how much resource really needs to go into that part of the business. So we manage their sort of emotional well-being right through up until they leave. And then when they leave, it's such a risky time, that part when they leave, because people just feel completely lost and they're institutionalized. They potentially have feelings of rejection. It's huge. So we have teams that I work with. So it doesn't always hit safeguarding in terms of immediate risk, but we have player care teams that sit and kind of work with what we call our alumni and check in with them. But it's not, yeah, again, not the easiest part of the job really, is kind of having those really difficult conversations with someone that perhaps this isn't going to work out for them. So
Ooh,
it's a bit of a journey.
yeah. Eleanor, your job, like that is, ooh. Like I was like, okay, I get it. Younger players, right? Maybe 16, 17. We're talking starting at 8 years old. Like,
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
biggest issue with our young ones is social media. I mean, me and my team are kind of the horse has bolted with social media. You know, all the platforms say you can't be 30, you have to be 13 to use any of these apps. But the 8-year-olds are all on there, and if the 8-year-olds aren't on there, their parents are on there promoting them. Nike are like giving them deals, football boot deals, and parents are saying, you know, my boy's signed with Fulham Football Club. He's going to be a professional player, and this is 8-year-olds. So I don't know what you were doing when you were 8. I'm probably underselling myself, but I definitely wasn't far from just playing with my Barbie house. Like, I don't think I had career aspirations at 8. Maybe that says something about how the world's changing. But,
yeah.
these 8-year-olds today, they're starting their careers at 8 years old, and they are like becoming mentally prepared to and disciplined to begin their careers at 8 years old, which I think is quite remarkable. But it's also worrying because the expectations that the child and the family have around the potential that this could bring is sometimes disproportionate to the actual reality of how often that happens. So I think the statistic we use is even when you get to 16 and you are offered a scholarship, only 1% of those boys, I'm talking about the boys' academy system, will make it to a professional Premier League footballer. The statistics are so low. Yeah, so managing those expectations, that's the biggest worry because of that. Being here at 9, leaving here when you're 20 and you haven't got a job to go to, and you've been told since you were 8 years old you're going to make it, is, yeah, the kind of the most one of the most difficult parts, really.
Yeah, I mean that's really that's heavy for them, for you, and just everything in between. I mean, I just can't imagine like 8-year-olds and like football is not to quote Danny Rojas from Ted Lasso, but football is life and that's it. Like,
Yeah, it really
oh,
is. I think it is in this country though. Like it is football is embedded in society. Like it has its own issues, societal issues as well. But football in this country is means a lot to a lot of people. And yeah, the whole side of it, whether you're a player, a supporter, it brings about a lot of emotions and positive ones, but there's also the negative side of things when things aren't going so well as well, where, especially if we get supporters or people online who want to send abuse to players, etc. It has its ups and downs, really.
okay, this whew, we dove into a lot. So this is going to be for all you listeners, this is going to be a two-part series. So we just learned so much about how they do things at Fulham Football Club, and then really just football in general, and how they do things differently than they do in the United States. So we just learned a lot here. So next week we're going to pick up and we're going to talk more about Eleanor and, how she deals with just the real things like overcoming self-doubt and imposter syndrome, and how does she deal with nerves for speaking at the conference and things like that. So join us back next week. So what did you think of this episode? Do you know another woman who works or is aspiring to work in sports? Would you do me a favor and share this with them? It would mean so much if together we could support and inspire other women on their journey. And let's stay connected. I love meeting and talking to new people. Follow me on Instagram at Jahaan Blake, and join the free Game of Her Own community by visiting jahaanblake.com. I can't wait to meet you.